when Alexander Spotswood decided this was going to be the place that he was going to site a fort on the frontier, as he perceived it, the frontier of Virginia, in 1714, he chose this area, built the fort here, settled it with German settlers, and within a 10-year period, this moved from being what the English considered wilderness to the fort setting to then Spotswood building a grand home for himself. If anybody's been to Colonial Williamsburg and seen the governor's palace rebuilt there, imagine that governor's palace behind you. Alexander Spotswood built an incredibly large building for himself out here in what had been wilderness just 6 years before. Now we become part of a larger county, Spotsylvania County. We start to have development of other municipal buildings. So off in the woods, there was been a larger community called Germanna. All of that happened in a space of just 10 years. We look at development today. I mean, we all know that Plank Road out to Germanna Highway is continuously growing and growing and growing. But imagine that change that occurred here in this place over that 10-year span is kind of remarkable. All right. So let me go on with my formal presentation, and I'll stop geeking out about the history. Early American historian William Smith wrote in his book, The History of the First Discovery and Settlement of Virginia, and mind that this was published in 1747. He wrote that inferior courts were appointed in convenient places to relieve the governor and council from their vast burden of business and to render justice more cheap and accessible. Smith goes on to say that although Virginia's populated areas had not been yet divided into counties at that period of 1620s and 1630s, that these inferior courts, as he called them, were the precursor to what would become the county courts. So that gives you a little bit of idea about, how court systems rolled out in the colonial period of Virginia. And this just fits in within that rollout. Spotsylvania County was first organized out of Essex County in 1721. It was uniquely named in honor of Alexander Spotswood, Spotsylvania, you get that? Most counties in colonial Virginia were typically named for royalty, examples being like King and Queen County, Princess Anne County, or they were given English place names such as Gloucester and Essex. So this was kind of an unusual honorific for Alexander Spotswood to have this newly formed Spotsylvania County. Spotswood was given the opportunity to pick the location for the county seat. He chose Germanna, right next to his grand home, behind you on the lands that he provided. Spotswood was given £500 to build a courthouse, a jail, stocks and pillory, and then a church here at Germanna, as all buildings that are functioning for the county. In the first years before the buildings were completed, the court met in Spotswood's home. And let me assure you that there was a lot of grumbling about that they were meeting in Spotswood's home and not in a proper building at the time. Then finally, in 1724, Spotswood turned over a new courthouse to the county. The grumbling continues. It even said, as he turned it over, that the plaster above the judge's bench had not yet completely dried. Nevertheless, the first county court session in the completed court building took place on September 1st, 1724, 300 years ago. Okay, let's talk about court days in colonial Virginia. Colonial settlement in Virginia was not based around townships, as we think about it today, or cities as we more think about things today. Instead, individual households spread themselves out along the banks of Virginia's rivers. People wanted to grow tobacco. Virginia's elites collected vast land holdings to grow their wealth. They also wanted access to rivers to transport those goods and to be part of the trade going back and forth. So that the settlement seemed to just spread out along the riverways. County seats require some clustering of buildings, municipal buildings. In a way, that's a development. However, the buildings typically look deserted for most of the year, only coming to life or full existence during court sessions or muster days. Court days created an opportunity for the male part of Virginia county society to become visible, similar to what they would sort of occur when they went to church, when they went to the parish church. It was a place to be seen and accounted for, with your presence. When one entered the court, one saw gentlemen justices bewigged and dressed in their fine coats and waistcoats, seated on a raised bench. Today, that image may seem strange to us, maybe even a little bit comical. Bewigged always makes me giggle a little bit. But these were the outward signs of those in power at the time. Power in their property holdings, power in their relationships across the colony, power in the courts. The proceedings of the courts could be seen much as a performance. Both English and colonial court proceedings of the day had ties to oral tradition. Most of the audience, those in attendance, were not literate. Historian Rhys Isaac estimates that among white males at the time, in the beginnings of the 1700s, only 62% were literate. Literacy rates were lower among women, servants, and the enslaved. If you were to time travel, go back in time 300 years, 3 out of 4 people you encountered would rely on spoken word to get their news and information. Now, as an anthropologist, I would like to sort of just underline, that doesn't mean that these people are any less smart than we are. They just worked in the world in a different way. They did not wake up and check their phones immediately first thing in the morning. Instead, they got news through interactions, through social connections, those sorts of things. While court proceedings highlighted the county's gentlemen, there was place in them for others as well. Middling farmers, small landholders, of which there were many, had use of the court systems. They would be entitled to a voice in those courts. But the courts also sort of had impact on others in the community as well, and they weren't as connected to the court system. Women, servants, the enslaved, and even indigenous people who continued to live around these settler communities. Some of those people living here by choice, some of them living here by force.